Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Agatha Caraballo, and I guess now afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's Leadership Lecture Series. We're very excited to be joined by Ramiro Inguanzo, who is the Assistant Village Manager for the Village of Bal Harbour. If you notice, his bio is posted in the chat, but I'd like to just give him an opportunity to talk about his leadership journey, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. And thank you, Dr. Caraballo, for inviting me here today to speak with you. And I see I've joined a great group of individuals that have participated in this session during the fall semester. Yossi Galeano, Carlos Bahia, Jennifer Moon, Ralph Rosado, Ralph Casals, Jimmy Morales, Merritt Steerheim, so many people that have either mentored me personally or that I'm currently a colleague with and learning from every day. And I see you've got a bunch of great people coming up in the next few weeks too. Anna Garcia, Chris Russo, Deputy Mayor Maurice Kemp. So Dr. Caraballo, thank you for putting together such an amazing leadership series over the last several weeks and into the next few weeks as the semester wraps up. So I connected with Dr. Caraballo several months ago through the Local Government Hispanic Network. It's an affiliate of the International City County Management Association, ICMA. I know many of you are connected through the chapter at FIU. And I mention this because it's a professional organization, obviously, for Hispanics in public sector, local government. And I mention it because that's one example of the importance of really connecting with professional organizations because you get to meet so many people. And it's a great opportunity to make all kinds of connections really all over the world at this point. So I wanted to mention that and appreciate that I had that chance to meet Dr. Caraballo that way, and now I'm here. So thank you for inviting me again. So she asked me, she just mentioned to share a little bit of my story, my leadership career journey. And you're going to see that the theme of what I'm going to talk about is being at the right place at the right time is really important. And that sounds like maybe luck has a lot to do with, somebody's success. And it does. But being at the right place at the right time also requires you to figure out what those right places are at those right times. And it's your job, I think, to make sure that you put yourself in a position that you find a way to get to the right place at the right time, because that's really, at least in my experience, it's really what's helped me throughout my college career and then throughout my professional career over the past 25 years. So I'm not gonna quite start at the beginning of my personal story, but I'm gonna start at a place that I think is relevant for most of you that are on this call, college. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences both in undergrad and in my MPA at graduate school, because both of those really, because of opportunities to be at the right place at the right time, really kind of set in motion where I am today, 25 years later. So let me start with college. And I'll start with undergrad first. I attended Florida State University in Tallahassee. Back when I went in the late 80s, I was the only person from my high school class that went to FSU, which is kind of strange because back in those days, at least, the community I came from, my parents are Cuban Americans who immigrated here in the 60s. And for whatever reason, that group of kids from those early immigrants, at least from Cuba, I don't know why, but they tended not to go away to school. Maybe it's because our parents had to leave their own country and, it was obviously traumatic in some ways for some of them. But kids didn't really go away to school, at least not from my high school. So I was the only kid that went to FSU back in the late 80s from my class anyway. And when I got to campus, Tallahassee is a little bit different. I grew up in Hialeah. It's a little bit different from where I had grown up. I remember early on in the first couple of weeks of being there, I was walking in the student union that was there at the time. It's since come down for renovation. But that student union at FSU back then was a building that was built in the 60s, and it had a beautiful interior courtyard. And the offices in the student union, it was a 3-story building, all kind of faced the interior courtyard. And on the second floor of one of these offices, there was a poster, an image that really caught my attention. It was an image of Che Guevara, who I'm sure you all know is it's a well-known revolutionary, controversial individual. So I see this image of Che Guevara, and it caught my attention because where I came from, that was not an image that people tended to portray in a positive or a public area. So I thought to myself, what is this image of Che Guevara doing there? So I went up to the second floor of the student union. I'd never been inside the student union before. I'd only been on campus for a couple of weeks. But I went inside, and when I went to the second floor, I discovered that that was the offices of student government and all the student organizations. So I went to the main reception area and I asked the woman, I said, hey, there's an office that's got this image, and can you please tell me whose office it is? So she gave me the name of the individual, and it so happened to be someone that was in an elected student government position. I went, knocked on the door, and the young woman that opened the door, I explained to her, hey, I'm curious, why do you have this image of this person? And she explained, that he was a revolutionary hero and so forth. And I kind of gave her what I knew about this individual, which was way different than the image she had. And it was interesting because we were obviously both from a very different political perspective. She tended to be, as no surprise, much more liberal. And back then I grew up in the Reagan 80s from a Cuban family, very conservative. So it was interesting because we got into this dialogue about this individual and what she felt he represented versus what I felt he represented. And suffice to say, I never persuaded her to see my perspective on the individual, nor did she. But what happened was we developed a friendship, and she was in her senior year in college. I was starting, and she encouraged me to get involved in SGA, which I did. At the end of the year with the elections and so forth, I got involved. I ran for an office, and I was lucky enough to be elected in a position, and I remained in SGA throughout the my tenure in undergraduate school. And I say that this was an important opportunity for me because I often think back about, did I do the right thing about going up and questioning somebody about obviously something they felt strongly about? And I could have done one of two things. I could have just ignored it and said, it is what it is, who cares, she's wrong, obviously. Or I could have done what I did and went and had a conversation with the person about it. I was very polite. I'm glad I did it because obviously it helped me in many ways. But again, I had a choice. I could have ignored it or I could have questioned it. And I chose to question it. And that questioning put me at the right place at the right time, because that person, even though she was very ideologically different than myself, she saw in me the potential to get involved and engaged on campus. And she encouraged me to run for a position, which I did. And that was important because throughout my tenure in FSU in student government, I had a chance to become close to a faculty advisor to the SGA over the couple of years that I was involved. And that was important because coincidentally, this person was a liaison to the state legislature. And I didn't know this at the time that I got involved in SGA. And when I went to FSU, I didn't really know much about the state legislature, to be honest with you. But this faculty advisor taught me a lot about the legislature and made me aware of an opportunity that I think really was, the catalyst for me entering into government. At the time, and the state legislature still has it, they have a fellowship program. Many of you perhaps have looked into it, and if not, you should. It's through the Florida House of Representatives. And it's a wonderful program where they identify X number of students every year based on the budget. And if you're selected, you're employed by the state legislature. And more importantly, they pay for your MPA program at FSU. So toward the end of my college undergraduate degree, this faculty advisor encouraged me to apply for this position based on, her having gotten to know me over the last couple of years in SGA at FSU in undergrad. I applied and I was selected for the program. And I really believe her influence had a lot to do with it. And again, I don't know that I would have had that chance had I not even met this person. But I happened to be at the right place at the right time because I did something to put myself there. So being selected for this program was amazing. It gave me a job right out of college in the state legislature. I was assigned to the Appropriations Committee of the Florida House of Representatives, and they were paying for my graduate degree. So it was like a win-win-win situation for me. Very lucky, and I feel very blessed that I had that opportunity. So while I was working in the state legislature, as I mentioned, I got assigned to the Appropriations Committee of the Florida House. And specifically, I was assigned to work with the staff liaison that worked on the subcommittee that dealt with education, both K-12 and higher education. So I sort of became a subject matter expert in education at the state level, again, both at the K-12 public level and at the higher education public and private level as well. Did a lot of research, did a lot of analysis, got to know the representatives that were working on that committee, spent a lot of time really getting to know that part of the state budget and those specific issues pertaining to education. And again, right place at the right time, because what happened next is really what helped me get my first job out of graduate school. So based on the work that I was doing on the subcommittee, I became aware of a committee, a state committee that dealt specifically with issues pertaining to higher education. At the time, it was called the Florida's Post-Secondary Education Planning Commission. And the members of the commission were individuals appointed by the governor. The governor at the time, when I was there, was Lawton Childs. And it was a 12-member commission board. And one of the seats was occupied by a student that was appointed by the government on an annual basis. So when I saw this, being the type of person I am, I said, hey, I could do that. I could be that student member. So sure enough, I applied. If any of you have ever applied for a gubernatorial appointment type position, you know, there's a process. You apply and you go through backgrounds and those kinds of things. So I went through that process, and luckily I was selected to be the student member for a year on Pepsi. So while I was on Pepsi, one of the issues that they were looking at the time, I'm going to give you some context, this is in the early 90s, was the concept of service learning in higher education. And I know now we all are very familiar with service learning, but service learning is that concept of, you know, making education practical in one way and using service, volunteerism, as an opportunity to engage students in real life practical issues, whether they're political or social or private, whatever the case may be. So Pepsi really focused on this issue and relied on me as the student advisor to really kind of give them advice from a student perspective about what service learning could look like and so forth. And I'm real proud to say that based on that work, the state actually adopted certain service learning components that are still in place today. Many public colleges specifically have service learning components that are integrated into the curriculums in many ways and in many levels. So here's how Pepsi helped me get my first job then. So I had been working in the Appropriations Committee, the Education Subcommittee, for over a year. I was now on this statewide commission that dealt with issues pertaining to higher education. And at these state meetings, many individuals in higher education in the state of Florida participated. One of those was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Eduardo Padron, who many of you may know. He's the former president, longtime president of Miami-Dade College. And if you ever met Dr. Padron, he's a very engaging, very caring, very intelligent individual. Anyway, he would attend our meetings and so forth. And I got to know him. He was very interested in this concept of service learning. In fact, I'm proud to say Miami-Dade College was really the first public college, anyway, in the state of Florida to really integrate service learning in their curriculum. Dr. Padron created an Office of Service Learning at the time that's still in place today. And he was a big proponent of this concept. Anyway, he asked me what I was doing, you know, after graduation and so forth. And I told him that, you know, I was going to be applying for jobs. I wasn't really sure. And he said, well, if you're interested in working for Miami-Dade College, let me know. So I did. I let him know that I was interested, and an opportunity presented itself at the college right after I graduated with my MPA, and it was an assistant dean position. And I was a 24-year-old student who had just been hired to be an assistant dean at Miami-Dade College. One of the youngest assistant deans ever hired. I came into the college. I worked for Dr. Padron at the time. He was the campus president for the Wolfson campus. He hadn't been hired as the college president yet. That didn't happen until 1995. So I worked directly under Dr. Padron. I learned a lot from him. But again, it was one of those things where I happened to be at the right place at the right time, because in the early 90s, Dr. Padron was very connected to the Clinton administration, specifically to the US Department of Education. And there were a lot of individuals from the US Department of Education who were coming down to Miami, meeting with Dr. Padron, and I got to be part of some of those meetings and got to meet some of those individuals. So I'll fast forward to 1996. President Clinton gets reelected. One of the individuals that I had met became a assistant undersecretary under the Department of Education, and called me up. This is 1996, so I think email had just come out, but he called me on a landline phone. He called me and he said, hey, listen, there are a lot of opportunities up in DC. Even though President Clinton's been reelected, there's a lot of transition that's happening. Would working in the federal government be something that you might be interested in? And, DC for me had always been a place I'd visited a few times. I loved it. So the idea of, I'm still relatively young in my, mid to late 20s, pretty mobile. So the idea of being able to go to DC and work at the federal level was definitely very appealing to me. My conundrum was, I loved my job at the college. Dr. Padron was an incredible mentor. He still is. So my debate was, do I stay here knowing that I probably could have a pretty good future at the college? I was still relatively young. I had a pretty, mid-level position in academia, and college, very large institution, has all kinds of opportunities all the time. So I probably could continue to grow at the college. Or do I go to DC? So something kind of persuaded me to move to DC. I did. I took this job in DC. I was up there for 4 years for pretty much the remainder of President Clinton's term. Had a chance to work with all kinds of different, federal agencies, got to learn a lot about the federal government. So I was super happy I did that. President Clinton's term starts to wind down in the late 90s. Around 2000 was the election, as we know. And I had to figure out what I was going to do next. So during my time in DC, again, right place at the right time kind of thing, I had met a gentleman, also from Hialeah. I never met him in Hialeah. I met him in Washington, DC. He was Hispanic. We had both joined a professional organization for Hispanic leaders in government. He had become the county administrator in Montgomery County, Maryland, and got to know him. Coincidentally, we had both come from the same place. We knew many people in common. We'd gone to different high schools, but still Hialeah it's a big city, but it's kind of a small city too. So we kind of, struck up a relationship. Well, in 2000, he gets hired as the city manager in Miami Beach. And before he moves down, he calls me and he says, hey, look, you've told me on a few occasions that you are interested in going back home at some point. I'm going to become the city manager in Miami Beach. If you're interested in a job, I know that yours is kind of winding down, let me know. So sure enough, I did. A few months later, I moved back home to Miami and I started working for the city manager in Miami Beach. He hired me as his chief of staff, and he gave me an opportunity to kind of work in a lot of different areas within the city of Miami Beach. Miami Beach, as many of you know, is an amazing city. It's a relatively small city. It's less than 100,000 people, but with tourism and visitors, it could swell up to anywhere near 200,000-300,000 people at any given moment. In South Florida, it's a pretty dynamic city. If you heard Jimmy Morales speak previously, he's the current city manager there now. You know what an amazing but very complex city it is. So got to learn a lot while I was there. I was there for about 12 years. The manager was there about 12 years and he left. He came to Bal Harbour Village, which is where I am now. And about a year after he came here, He persuaded me to leave that big city of Miami Beach and come to a much smaller city. And a lot of people at the time kind of questioned my decision. And it kind of takes me back to that other period in my journey where I had a choice to make between staying in Miami-Dade College, knowing that I could probably continue to grow, or going to someplace different and experiencing something different. And the reason I chose to leave Miami Beach and come to Bal Harbour was really two things. A was my boss, who had really become my mentor, a very close friend, someone that I admire greatly, have a wonderful relationship with, continue to learn from every day, gives me all kinds of amazing opportunities. So I had that. And the other thing that was kind of like nudging me was, at the time, this was about 6 years ago, I've got 3 kids. They're teenagers now, but they were preteens when I made this decision. And, you know, one of the things that I heard from a lot of mentors and a lot of people say who are older and who have gone through their careers is, you know, when you ask them the question about, hey, what would you have done differently? Or what did you regret? Or, you know, something along those lines. The one constant, you know, response that I hear is, I wish I would have spent more time with my family or my kids, you know, more life work balance kind of thing. And I thought to myself, you know, Miami Beach, we worked hard. I mean, when I tell you we worked like 12 to 14 hours a day, I tell that to people and they say, come on, it's local government. You didn't, but we did. We really did, because it was a very complex place. So I thought to myself, you know, my kids are about to become, they're preteens, they'll be teens soon. You know, I'm going to make a decision that I think might be better for my family. And I did. And I'm so glad I did, because Bal Harbour is definitely a much smaller city. So still challenges and still plenty to do and very exciting, but it has afforded me the opportunity to spend much more time with my family than I previously did. And now that I have twin girls that are juniors in high school, and my son's about to start high school next year. No regrets whatsoever, because I really, really have been able to spend a lot more time with them than I would have had I stayed in Miami Beach. So I'm really glad I made that decision. Time goes by, as we all know, very, very quickly. My kids, I'm sure, will be done in high school in a blink of an eye. But at that point, I can kind of reassess. And when they no longer need me as much, you know, then perhaps that's an opportunity for me to do something different. I'm not worried about it, because I've been pretty lucky. I've been able to put myself in the right place at the right time. So I'm sure I'll be able to do that again if I need to. So we'll see what opportunities present themselves in the future. So that's where I am today. I'll tell you, you know, most recently what I've been focused on here is, by chance, last year I was elected president of the Miami-Dade City County Management Association. It's the professional association for city managers and management level employees in Miami-Dade County, in our 34 cities and in the county. So I was elected president last year. At the end of my term, which was in May, with all of that was going on with coronavirus and so forth, I was actually reelected to a second term. I become the first person to serve 2 consecutive terms. It's typically a 1-year appointment. But anyway, here I am again. Been very actively as the president of the MDCCMA. I was contacted by Mayor Jimenez and asked to serve on his coronavirus recovery task force, of which I had been serving on pretty much since the end of March. So I've been working very, very, very closely with the county, very closely with Jennifer Moon, who many of you had a chance to hear from, I guess, a couple of weeks ago. As you know, she's the deputy mayor that's really over the whole coronavirus task force that Mayor Jimenez has put together. So it's going to sound weird when I say it's been great for me, because obviously we've been dealing with the very negative impacts of the pandemic. But it was a great opportunity for me to connect with many people that I had not connected with in that way before. So I've gotten to know many people at the county, Deputy Mayor Kemp, that you'll hear from in a couple of weeks, Deputy Mayor Moon, Mayor Jimenez himself. And it's really provided me an opportunity to work much closer with all our managers in our 34 cities on specific issues and concerns that they have, to identify those to the larger task force and try to come up with solutions. When the pandemic started back in March, as is the case with all of us everywhere, it was completely new to us. And, our managers are used to dealing with emergencies all the time, but this was a different beast. Nobody knew what to expect. The rules changed daily. Every day there was something different. So we all kind of like learned together, and our association of managers became very close and very united. We got on Zoom very frequently. We got on conference calls very frequently. We still do. We've got our weekly call this afternoon where we come together and we just together are learning how to navigate the challenges that the pandemic has presented himself, because it was definitely a new issue for all of us. But gladly, we've been able to navigate it and just kind of get through it together, and one day at a time, and everybody doing their piece and part to hopefully try to get through this and make things better for everyone in our community. So that's pretty much been my priority the last several months. I've almost been detached from my regular duties in Bal Harbour, and specifically have become the coronavirus link, not only here in Bal Harbour, but really within our Association of City Managers, and the link between managers and the county and what the county is doing. So with that, I think I've spoken way more than I thought I would. So I'll stop there. Dr. Carvalho.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much. One thing that kept jumping out to me is how important networking and mentors are. And that when you're able to give it an opportunity to show what you're capable and your value, then people start coming to look for you and recruiting you for those positions. So I'd like to, remind that to the students, even when you sometimes may not notice that people are paying attention, they are, and they can lead to opportunities.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Dr. Carvalho, that's absolutely correct. In my case, the three examples I gave were all exactly that. There were people that I met through, again, I'll say by chance, but it was a coordinated by chance because I had to do something to get myself there. But once I was there, I used the student government example. I met someone who I had no idea would help me the way that she did, because I'm pretty sure she's the key that was able to get me that opportunity in the state legislature. And then once in the state legislature, again, by chance, where I landed, I met Dr. Padron. And, he kind of right out of college offered me an opportunity. And then the next one was my current boss, who I've worked with for the past 20 years. I met him by chance in Washington, D.C. through a professional association. We struck up a friendship, and I didn't work for him up there. I knew him personally and somewhat professionally, but he gave me a job, not really knowing me professionally. And here I am 20 years later, still working for him. So obviously that chemistry worked. But you're absolutely right. And my advice to you and the lesson to you is you gotta network, you gotta engage, you gotta get yourself out there, create your own right places and right times, because like Dr. Carvalho said, people do observe and they do notice. And it's important to be engaged. It's important to be out there and be involved in different associations and in different causes. So it's super important that you do that.
With that said, I'm going to share a story from a couple of years ago. I'm a little embarrassed to tell it, but you had invited, when we first got involved, the local government Hispanic, and you were having an event at the Ritz-Carlton in Bal Harbour. Yeah. And I remember at the time I had invited students to come to this luncheon because you had city managers from all across the country there. And guess what? Not a single student showed up. And I remember being so disappointed, not because, of course, I wanted FIU to represent, but just that there weren't any students that had taken advantage to really just to network with an entire group of city managers. And I say that now because we don't ever want a repeat of that. But when you're invited into the room, take advantage of these opportunities. I know through the local government Hispanic network, through Miami-Dade City County Management Association, there are opportunities to engage and meet people. So I'm putting out there now. I hope I get flooded with emails afterwards, finding out how to get involved.
Yeah, and Dr. Carvalho, you're right. I remember that now. It was a couple of years ago. The local government Hispanic network, we were having our regional conference here in Bal Harbour. And listen, missed opportunity, because yes, the networking was important, but if you've never been to the Ritz-Carlton in Bal Harbour, it's really, really nice. And the food they served was really, really, really good. So anyway, But you're right. Hopefully there'll be those kinds of opportunities. And
we're not going to miss out on it again. But also just on that sense, we're reaching out and we're creating an ICMA mentoring program. And again, just taking advantage of those opportunities. Again, I hope that no matter how we call it, leaning in, stepping up, that we just take advantage of these opportunities. I'm going to go to the chat for just a few minutes because noticing some of the comments and questions. Jeffrey Francis, it's a big accomplishment to be the youngest assistant dean, a very inspiring story. But then also just as we allow ourselves to be in uncomfortable positions with leaders, I know there's sometimes that intimidation factor, but being able to kind of get past that, as Nicole mentioned, with the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And sometimes just realize you do belong to be in the room. And again, just feeling comfortable in that sense. Jeffrey mentions networking, of course, can go a long way. And Jacob's question, when did you find out that you wanted to settle with the federal, state, or local government?
Yeah, so it's funny. I feel very lucky and blessed that I've had a chance to work at the state level. That was my first when I worked in the state legislature, and Miami-Dade College as well. As just like FIU, it's a state institution from the state of Florida. And then I went to the federal level and then the local level. And, when I was in graduate school and doing the work that I was doing with the committee on the subcommittee on education, I kind of thought that education was the area that I wanted to focus on. And I did. And then there was something when I was in education, and again, I've shared with you the conflict I had with trying to make that decision of, hey, I work for Dr. Padron, who's an amazing leader. I've got a pretty good job at a relatively young age that I am pretty confident that if I don't mess up, I will probably be able to kind of, continue to grow. But something inside of me said, maybe there's more. Maybe there's other opportunities. And something about the federal level was really enticing to me. And I took a chance. So I went from, what I thought would be a career in higher education to working at the federal level in a number of different agencies, the Bureau of Healthcare, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. I mean, you can't get more away from, what I was doing in higher education than the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, which is part of the HHS, that basically they're the part of the government that tests drugs, before they go to market. They're the ones that ensure that they're safe. I'm sure they're heavily involved in the vaccine trials that are taking place now for the COVID-19. But I tried something different. And even at the federal level, when I had the opportunity to try the local government, I said, hey, why not? I've tried state, I've tried federal, let me try local and see if that's different, better, what that experience is kind of like. And, 20 years later, I'm still in local government. I really believe that local government is the part of government at the three levels, federal, state, and local, that really obviously impact people the most. We do a lot of things. We make sure that our communities are safe through public safety, police officers and firefighters. We make sure our communities are clean. We make sure that, the schools are running well, that the roads are properly maintained, that there's parks and all kinds of different things that are really important to communities. So I really feel that at the local level, we really do make the most impact. But there's no denying that the state and federal levels also have incredible impacts on our lives. I mean, look at what's going on, in the last 9 months alone, and what, issues the federal government is dealing with and state government is dealing with. And they play a huge role and have a huge impact in our lives. So I think any level of government is important. We all have the same mission, right? Is to provide a service, it's to pass laws and provide services. That's the mission of government at any level. How the federal government does it and state governments and local governments do it is the same. Who it impacts is slightly different because at the federal level, obviously it impacts everybody in the country. At the state level, it impacts all the residents of the state. And at the local level, it applies to the residents within your particular community. But the mission is the same. Pass laws that will help people and provide services that will help people. That's the mission of government. So all three, I think, are very important. My personal favorite, I'll tell you though, and that's probably why I think I've stayed in local government for so long, is definitely local government, because I really kind of get to see the immediate impacts that the work we do has on people every day.
No, that's a great point. I'm going to go to Salome's question, who asked, can you describe the process required to produce the annual report? How many people are involved in it? Is there a set release date?
The annual report
I
for,
guess for your community, I guess does,
oh, the budget?
mhm.
Okay. So budget's pretty similar in local governments for everybody. It's funny, you remind me, I just started watching Parks and Rec. I'd never seen it before. It's funny because people in this business always say, how can you have never seen Parks and Rec? And in Parks and Rec, they refer to the budget, the annual budget as the annual report. So I think that's why I made the connection. So anyway, so the budget process is super important. It's, the budget is what guides everything you do for the year. We here in Bal Harbour, same as in Miami Beach, our budget's guided by a strategic plan. We engage our village council. We have 5 elected officials here in Bal Harbour. We engage them every year in a strategic planning process, and we revisit the strategic priorities that we've already identified to make sure that they're still the correct ones. And if they need to change, or if perhaps they've been accomplished in some way, what other priorities we identify. And then based on that collective effort on our strategic plan, then our budgets or allocates funds to make sure that those priorities are addressed in every way for the coming year. So, the bulk of our work happens, actually, we'll start in January with our budget process, because that's where we engage our elected officials through our strategic planning process. And again, we go back and we look at our current priorities, make sure that they're still the correct ones, make sure that the ones that we want to continue working on into the next fiscal year. So that process takes about 3 to 6 months, which puts us into around June or July. So by that time in the calendar year, we know what our strategic priorities will be for the next fiscal year. And in July, then we start allocating the dollars based on what we anticipate the revenue will be from property taxes and other sources of revenue, and start allocating those dollars to those priorities. So it really, for us, it's really like a 9-month process. It really kind of begins in January through the strategic part. And then kind of in July, it starts to, we start to allocate dollars to those priorities. And we finish it in September with our budget hearing. So we just finished it a couple of weeks ago. Our fiscal year just started October 1. And by January, we'll begin our process again.
There you go. Thanks again, Francis. And I'm actually really interested in this next question from Jeffrey Francis. If you've thought about working in higher education and returning, consider being an professor. And if so, definitely let's talk.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, I've been teaching at, my heart never really left Miami-Dade College. When I moved back to Miami, it's one of those right places at the right time. So I'll tell the story really quickly. But I have been an adjunct professor at Miami-Dade College for 15 years now, actually, right before my girls were born. In fact, this term I'm teaching a mini term that starts tonight. It's an 8-week course, and it's introduction to government. So we talk about local, state, and federal government. So I've been teaching it, and I love it. I know that when I retire, that's what I want to do. If I can only do it as a part-time individual, that's what I'll do, and I'll be very blessed because I really love it. And the class that I start tonight, it's the first virtual class I teach. All my classes have been in person, so it'll be interesting for me because part of what I love about teaching is being in the classroom and engaging with the students. And I get to teach something that I'm passionate about, that I love, that I like. So my job is to help students understand the importance of government. I think we can all agree that government sometimes, a lot of times, gets a bad rap. Most people tend to not necessarily have the best opinion of government. And I feel like my job in my class is to at least educate my students about all the things that government does do right, and all the ways that government does help, and what the important role that they play in our lives every day, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep. So I'll tell you a real quick story about being at the right place at the right time and how I got into teaching. So my wife, who I met in DC, she's an attorney, and when we moved to Miami, she got hired to teach at Miami-Dade College as an adjunct professor in their law program, and the class was Introduction to the U.S. Constitution. And she taught for a couple of semesters before she became pregnant with our girls. We have twins. And that pregnancy was very difficult. She went into preterm labor very early on in her pregnancy, and her doctor put her on bed rest. She went on bed rest on September 30th of 2004, right? So it was 5 weeks after the semester had started. She calls her chair and she says, Dr. Munoz, I'm so sorry, but I'm not going to be able to teach. My doctor's already told me that I am on bed rest till these babies come out, and hopefully they don't come out, for several months. So Dr. Munoz says, oh my God, I'm not sure what to do. While I'd been at Miami-Dade College, I had met Dr. Munoz, an incredible man. Unfortunately, he's passed. And he says to Gina, he says, well, listen, I know your husband knows a little bit about government because you guys just moved down from Washington. And I think he worked up there in the federal government. Do you think he could sub for you until you get better? So my wife asked me, and I said, sure, absolutely. So I stepped foot into the classroom early October, and I've never left. I've taught every term. She never went back. And I took over her class. She took care of our kids for a few years. And then when she went back to work, it wasn't in the cards for her. But, that really was more by chance. That wasn't necessarily right place at the right time. But, it's a story of, it just happened by chance. And I've loved it ever since. And I've been fortunate to be able to teach every semester since then. So I do love teaching, and I hope I get to do more of it, in the next few years. When the kids...
Well, we're going to be reaching out as well if Miami-Dade College wants to share you. And with that, I actually wanted Jeffrey Francis. I'm going to encourage him. He just started at Miami-Dade College, so I'm going to encourage him to reach out to you.
Cool. Well, Jeff, look me up. If you haven't taken my class, or the class that I teach anyway, I would love to have you in my class.
It definitely will do. And we'll definitely keep in touch. And if you have any questions about teaching online, I'm happy to offer.
Thank you. I may need some advice. Yeah, and some help.
Not a problem. I'm going to go to Sylvia's question, which was one of the questions. That you're the director of tourism at the Village of Bal Harbour, and that South Florida has obviously been impacted by the lack of tourism due to the pandemic. So how are you planning to revamp tourism, or perhaps address that during this time?
Yeah. So the two cities I've worked for, both Miami Beach and Bal Harbour, we have something called it's a tourism tax. It's a resort tax. There's only 3 cities in Miami-Dade County that have it. So it's Miami Beach, Surfside, and Bal Harbour. Surfside's the city that's right between Bal Harbour and Miami Beach. The rest of the cities in the county do contribute to this resort tax. However, the county collects it, and the county uses it itself, mostly to fund the Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau. But our 3 cities here on the coast, Miami Beach, Surfside, and Bal Harbour, we collect our own resort tax. So we have to, by state law, use those dollars to promote tourism in our communities. No doubt, the pandemic has been devastating. I can tell you in Bal Harbour, we had been seeing record growth over the last several years. And in fact, this past fiscal year, from October 1st of 2019 through February of 2020, was our record 5 months. We had surpassed the previous year's collections, which had surpassed the previous years. I mean, we were on target. Super Bowl had helped incredibly, but we were on target to surpass our budget by $2 million in excess revenue that we collected. And then came the pandemic, devastating, March, April, May, June, July, really we collected nothing. The hotels were closed, as you know, our restaurants were closed. So where we were on target to collect, over $2 million from what we had projected, we actually ended up collecting 1.8 less than we had projected. So devastating. We're not alone. We collaborate very closely with our coastal communities, with the Greater Miami Convention and Visitors Bureau. It's tough. Tourism is going to be a really tough one. Here in Bal Harbour, we're a small community. Our restaurants in the Bal Harbour shops have been doing pretty well. They actually capitalized on the opportunity to do outdoor dining before they were really restricted to their indoor spaces. But the Bal Harbour shops took their interior courtyards on all 3 levels and created dining spaces, which has been great because now they're at overcapacity to where they were prior to March, being kind of more restricted in their space. So the restaurants are actually, thank God, doing pretty well. One of our hotels, the Ritz-Carlton, which we mentioned before, it's one of 2 properties in the Marriott chain that are surpassing revenue projections. It's a very small property. It's only got 77 rooms, but the benefit of that hotel is there's only 2 rooms per floor. It's just the design of the building. So it's a very private, and to get to your room, you have to take an elevator that only gets out on the floor that's got 2 rooms. So they've actually done a really good job of marketing to people that, want to find a space to get away from, and is semi-private. So they're actually doing pretty well. Our other hotels are seeing some challenges. Quite honestly, my prediction, for the next several months, it is what it is. I think this year, in many ways, is going to be a gap year. I think the whole industry has just realized that it's going to be a very challenging, next several months. My prediction, and this is just my personal opinion based on what I hear from the medical doctors that we speak to on our countywide task force, but I really believe that until the vaccine is out and is proven to be effective, I think, we're going to continue to experience challenges. And I think the tourism industry is not going to recover for, the next year to 2 years. I think people need to feel comfortable to travel. I think they need to feel comfortable that the vaccine is working. So I think we will get there. I think there's this pent up desire to travel. I think we're all experiencing it. But I think the next several months and probably into the next year is going to continue to be challenging. And you know what? It is what it is. We'll get through it. We'll recover, and there will be better times in the future. You're on mute, Dr. Carvalho.
Sorry. I'm going to go back to Jacqueline Souza's comment in the chat, since we mentioned the coronavirus task force, that there are so many different voices and opinions and trying to, work with different stakeholders from the elected officials to residents and business. As a manager, how do you balance all of those different conflicting stakeholders and their needs?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I know Mayor Jimenez has received a lot of criticism for some of the decisions he's made. But when you're in the room where it happens, if any of you have seen Hamilton, I've been lucky that I've kind of been in the room where he's made some of those decisions. I will give him credit for this. From the very beginning, he admitted that this was all very new to all of us and that he was going to rely on the medical experts. And when I tell you he's assembled a pretty impressive team of medical experts here in Miami-Dade County, you know the names because we've seen and heard many of them. Dr. Lillian Abu, Dr. Eileen Marty, many of these top infectious disease doctors, many folks from FIU's medical school. There were periods of time where he was making tough decisions, closing beaches, closing restaurants, closing retail. I mean, things that have, incredible economic impacts to people. And, he would discuss these issues and he would always go to the doctors and have the doctors, not one, but a collective group of them. And I'm talking about, it's like 10 doctors that he assembled, and he would rely on making his decisions based on what the majority of the doctors advised. And listen, I know he got criticized for that. I know from an economic perspective, he was criticized. I get it and I understand it. It was incredibly tough. But when you're dealing with something that's so unknown, that he based his decisions on what the doctors advise, because his goal, and the goal continues to be trying to make sure that people stay safe and that nobody dies. We don't know. Managers, I didn't know, but the doctors, they certainly knew better than we did, right? So you got to believe that relying on them was the right thing to do. And that's what he did. I know the mayor got criticized. I know we as managers, we got criticized in our community. And I get it because the restaurants and the hotels were struggling. But, when you could say that, look, it's a tough decision, but it was made by a collective effort of medical doctors who are subject matter experts in this field. And they're doing it because our collective goal is to make sure that people stay safe and that our hospitals don't get overwhelmed and that people don't die from this. Then I think that was the right thing to do. And, I think he and others will be judged by those decisions, but I'm always going to err on the side of, you got to go with what the medical experts advise, because that's why they're there. That's what they've studied. That's what they know. That's, their area of expertise, and they certainly know better than those of us that aren't doctors.
I agree. And part of being in leadership is making those tough decisions and, may the chips fall where they may. Just as we start to wrap up, I just wanted to ask, what do you think is your most important leadership characteristic or skill that you would advise students to develop?
Yeah, I tell my own kids, listen, right? Make sure you listen a lot. Make sure you understand different perspectives. I'll go back to that first example I gave you about that interaction I had with that young student leader at FSU who was in student government. You know, I think a lot about what's going on nowadays in politics, and you obviously see, you know, differences of opinions between people who, you know, skew to the right or skew to the left. And I hate to see that somehow we can't agree to disagree. And I go back to that example I shared with you, you know, this young woman, you know, at the time she was, you know, I would call her a hippie. And I'm sorry, I hope that doesn't offend anybody. I mean it in a very positive way, but she was very liberal. You know, she had this image of Che Guevara very different than the one I had. But you know what? We had conversations about it. I learned from her. I learned to listen to why she felt that way. And I think she did as well, because I think that's why she told me after we developed a friendship that, hey, you know, you got some good ideas, you know, and if you want to make an impact, go do something about it. Go run for an office and you put up a poster of whoever you want in your office. You know, if you want to put up a poster of whoever it is that you think is somebody that other students could learn from, then you do that. You know, you take the bull by the horns and you do it. And I look back on those conversations, and by the way, she and I are still good friends. We disconnected after college, but through social media have reconnected. I think that's one of the amazing things about social media is you can really, really connect with people all over the world. And we're friends, and we're still friends. And guess what? She's not voting for Donald Trump, I can assure you that. And, you know, she's very different politically than I am, but we're still friends. And we can agree 30 years later to disagree on what's important to her versus what's important to me. It doesn't make her bad. It doesn't make me right. That's how she believes. That's what she believes. And I always say, thank God we live in a country where people can feel and believe what they want to believe without any repercussions. So I think listening is extremely important. A lot of people get into arguments because they're not listening. Listen, and then at that point, offer what you have to offer. And hopefully the person on the other side of you listens as well.
That's great advice. And I just want to thank you again for just sharing your incredible story, those incredible takeaways. Appreciate all the questions from the students as well. I hope everyone will join me right now in a virtual round of applause using the reactions. And I just want to again thank you so much for taking your time today and sharing your expertise with us. And we look forward to continue to stay in touch and hopefully developing, again, the local government Hispanic network and the mentoring programs. And again, the words that you gave were definitely really appreciated.
Great. Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity, and good luck to all of you. Good luck with the rest of the term and the year. And hope I see some of you out there somewhere in either a professional association or a volunteer activity or somewhere out in our community. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.
Take care.
You see you. Take care.